Well, everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and take a look at the Google Pixel 6a and compare it against the Google Pixel 4 and see which specific device is the better one. Now, I'm going to tell you the Pixel 6a is probably the better one in every single area, but there are some really interesting things about the Pixel 4 that I actually found very interesting for the most part. Now, if you want to pick up either one of these phones or some other phones I'd recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of both these phones, the Google Pixel 4 had a 5.7-inch OLED display, and it was a 90Hz panel at 1080p. So it was a decent panel. It really wasn't like the craziest panel of that time, but it was good. For a 2019 phone, not many phones had 120Hz at that point. So, still 90Hz was really, really good. You had a little bit of bezel on the top, but it really wasn't that big of a deal. And when you look at phones nowadays, this one definitely looks a little bit more dated, but it's still not a bad panel, and I'm a fan of it. On the front of the Pixel 6a, on the other hand, we have a bigger 6.1-inch OLED display, and it is a 1080p panel. Now, this one is 60Hz, but you do have a lot less bezel on this panel, and that hole punch display on the center makes this thing look so much more modern than something like the Pixel 4. Now, one thing I definitely want to tell you is that the Pixel 4 was the somewhat flagship phone from Google at that time, where the Pixel 6a is more of the budget offering from Google. So you can see how the gaps are pretty much closing in on both of these phones. How crazy is it that the Pixel 6a kind of looks better and feels better than the Pixel 4, which was a much more expensive phone when it originally came out. It's definitely something that's super insane to me. Now, on the bottom, we have USB Type-C ports on both of these things, and on the back, we have a glass back on the Google Pixel 6a, and on the back of the Pixel 4, we had this glass back too, but on some models, like the model I had, it kind of feels like this other type of texture, and honestly, I liked it a lot. That type of I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of like a rubberized texture, but it's glass. It feels really good, and I was a humongous fan of that as well. Now, I will say the Pixel 6a probably looks a lot better nowadays too. The camera on the top right corner for both of these, but the slab of glass on the Google Pixel 6a with its, black bar that goes all the way across the top. I like that a lot, and I think it still holds up extremely well in this day and age. Now, I will say some other things. The Pixel 4 has wireless charging, where the Pixel 6a does not have any wireless charging. That can be a little bit of a disadvantage for some people. If you like wirelessly charging your phone, you will not have that type of capability on the Pixel 6a, which personally for me is not that big of a deal, but it is one of those things to keep in mind as well. On top of that, with the Pixel 4, we have better IP certification, IP68 on that one, where the Pixel 6a has IP67 dust and water resistance. So again, not the biggest deal in the world, but it is kind of one of those things to keep in mind. So it's not like the Pixel 6a is the better single one in every single area, but it is a little bit noticeably better in most areas, which is really, really cool to see. So in terms of that kind of covers it up on the outside of both of these. Now, in terms of the cameras between them, this is where things are very interesting. The Google Pixel 4a has a 12.2 megapixel wide angle lens and then a 16 megapixel telephoto lens, where the Google Pixel 6a has a 12.2 megapixel wide angle lens and a 12 megapixel ultra wide sensor. On the front, they pretty much had the exact same camera setup at 8 megapixels. I don't understand why they love these 8 megapixel sensors on the front, but with the Pixel 4, I personally thought this camera was good enough. I thought it was good, but the biggest disadvantage is that they didn't have an ultra-wide sensor on this thing, and for a phone manufacturer who claims, and their claim to fame was kind of like their camera for their original Pixel and even the Pixel 2 XL, honestly, it was very weird that they only stuck at 4K at 30 and not 4K at 60, when a majority of the other phones at this point, including the Galaxy S10 earlier that year and the iPhone 11s that came out right before this one, all had 4K at 60 on the back and the front. With this phone, with the Pixel 4, for a somewhat flagship phone that was competing with those ones, only having 4K at 30 was very strange, especially for a phone whose camera was the main focus in my opinion. I will say though, the camera quality is still pretty good. It's not like a bad quality phone or anything, but that was one of those things that kind of threw me off a little bit. On the Google Pixel 6a, on the other hand, you do have 4K at 60 on the back of this phone, which I think is really massive. Both of them can only do 1080p on the front, but it's still really cool that we have that capability on the Google Pixel 6a, that we can go ahead and utilize that 4K at 60, which I think is really awesome. You also have that ultra-wide sensor on the Pixel 6a, which I think is a really good lens, and I do want to say the Pixel 4's camera quality is still pretty decent. It's not a bad camera quality by any means, but the 6a having that 4K at 60 and having that ultra-wide sensor, I think is a really cool thing. But I will say with the camera features and everything, there's not like crazy amounts of features built in with the Pixel 6a in the camera standpoint, so that is another thing to kind of keep in mind as well. So in terms of the camera, I think the 6a definitely wins there. In terms of software and longevity between both, I think the Pixel 6a wins here as well. With the Pixel 4, I think this was a good phone. And like, you have to remember with Pixels, they last for a very long amount of time. They get software updates for many, many years. On the 6a, it's the same exact case, but I think in terms of the length of software updates, I think the 6a is going to actually outlast the Pixel 4 in some areas. So that might be another thing you might want to keep in mind as well. Personally, as I mentioned before, when it comes down to it, having a phone like the Pixel 6a is going to be there for a long period of time, and because it is the newer phone, you are going to be getting, a longer lasting phone from there too. So if you want the longest lasting device, the 6a is definitely the better way to go, but there's still always going to be a ROM community and a development community behind these phones too. So the 4a is still a decent option too if you were willing to custom ROM it. If not, then the 6a is 100% the better way to go there. So that kind of covers it out there in terms of the performance between both of these devices. Both these phones, I will say, are very interesting because the 6a is the faster one, but the Pixel 4 feels like the smoother one because of that 90Hz panel. So first of all, the 4 had that Snapdragon 855 chipset inside of it with 6GB of RAM, where the Pixel 6a has that Google Tensor chipset inside of it with 6GB of RAM as well. Now, RAM is the same on both. The Tensor chipset is going to be better than the Snapdragon 855, but another thing I want to note, with these storage models, you are getting twice. There's only one model of the Pixel 6a at 128GB. The top model of the Pixel 4 had 128, but the base model of the Pixel 4 had 64. So you are getting now twice the amount of base storage, even though there's only one of the 6a on both these phones. And that was another issue with the Pixel 4, no expandable storage, and it only tapped out at 128GB for one of their flagship phones. How can they make a flagship phone with that low amount of storage? It's very strange to me. I don't know why they did that. In terms of performance, I've always found that the Pixel 4 had pretty good performance for the most part. It pretty much matched what I was getting with something like a Galaxy S10, but with the S10 it was just a way better phone overall. But with the Pixel 6a, this is a solid upgrade in pretty much majority of the older Pixel lineups. Because the Google Tensor chipset is a chipset that's probably going to be around for a while, and Google makes this chipset, they want this chipset to be like at the forefront of everything they do. And I think, as I mentioned before, they want to go ahead and bring this chipset to other devices they make, like Chromebooks and tablets, and maybe license them out to other products, to other manufacturers too. Who knows? Because they make Android, maybe they'll make some features built into the Tensor chipset that other phones can't take access to, and maybe the Samsung will maybe use the Tensor chipset too. So I think Google has a long-term play here, and I think even if this chipset isn't at its greatest point right now, because these phones get software updates for so long, I think there's a chance that maybe 2 years from now we'll be getting some crazy features that some other phones don't have, just based off Google making these chipsets, just like how smooth certain iPhones are, because Apple goes ahead and optimizes the software. By them making the hardware and software, I feel like the Google Pixel 6a, including the 6 and the 6 Pro, will have the longest lifespan of most other phones probably in this day and age. With the Pixel 4, on the other hand, it's still a very good performing phone, but you're going to be getting a much better performing phone from the 6a than the Pixel 4. In terms of battery, I've found some crazy good battery life for my Pixel 6a. That one has a 4,410 mAh battery. My Pixel 4 had a 2,800 mAh battery, and honestly, I didn't really find the battery life on that phone being super crazy, but the 6a is definitely outperforming. I just did a battery comparison and outperformed my Pixel 6, my Galaxy S22, and my iPhone 13 by quite a big margin. So in terms of everything, what I would definitely tell you is I think the Pixel 4 is still a pretty decent phone if you can pick it up for maybe like $100 and something. But if you're spending more than $200 on that phone, I would probably recommend waiting out like 2 months or something and buying a Pixel 6a when those things go down in the used market a little bit more. That's kind of something that makes a little bit more sense to me. I wouldn't be the first one to go ahead and buy the Pixel 6a if you're kind of planning on upgrading your phone in the next like year or two. If you want to keep a phone for a long period of time, the 6a is there for you. If you want to keep it for a short amount of time, the 6a is there for you as well. I wouldn't necessarily recommend you to actually buy the Pixel 4 though. If you have the option, buy the Pixel 5. That may be a little bit of a better phone, but that's pretty much how I see it. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.